Clash of Steel has been out for a little bit. We've had some battle reports. We have plenty of videos spawned all over the YouTube, internet, whatever. People are working on models. It's the beginning of the game. The game is in its first season, 3 months worth. It's only really been out for like a month in my area. Some of you guys may have gotten it sooner. I've had enough times that I've gone over it and done the math, and I want to do kind of a deep dive where I look through each of the different forces available for Clash of Steel. I want to look at the rules in general, but I'm going to be short on that because the rules essentially are Flames of War with some clarifications. The one thing that really changes about the rules in Clash of Steel is the objective system and the fact that the game runs off of cards. Tactics cards and the special abilities you give your commander mean a lot. They do. They mean an awful lot. I am going to go over what makes Clash of Steel actually function as a game, and then how each of these forces fit as I see it. I have played a few hypothetical games with like essentially chits and scaled paper. I do have vehicles on the way that are supposed to be my force, but you know they're almost there. They're not quite, and I've yet to get a game lined up with my force that's pretty much table ready. I'm going to go over a few basics, and then I'm going to talk about each individual force. There will be marks in the notes below that you can go jump to the force or section that is of interest to you. Let's just get started. In Clash of Steel, the most important thing is speed. Unlike Flames of War, where you grab the objective and at the end of that turn you win the game, Clash of Steel is about timing, and so you accumulate points over the course of the game. This significantly changes how the game plays. Even though all of these occur the same way, there's an ending step where you get to remount and do your last stand at the ending step. So it's not at the beginning of your phase like in Flames of War, it's at the end of your turn you check to see whether or not that happens. The movement orders handle the same way. They are somewhat clarified, but then again that's expected. They don't have anything like dig in because you don't have infantry to dig in. Mistaken target is still here. Make sure to use that. The fact that forced last stand does depend upon having more than one unit standing is very important. So you're going to want units that count for your good spirits. Support units, you can bring 0 to 2 of them. I've got news for you. They make this more difficult. So strangely enough, support units now get levied against this one fact where they have to be worth the fact they don't count for morale. They have to be that good. And that's just my opinion, but it's a well-researched opinion. Commander abilities. I have to point out commander abilities do a lot for this game. You can even break the game using them, honestly speaking. Sometimes there's things that just you have to do, like let's say you are playing Soviets. This one, location. This is mandatory. That's a 2+. Not a +2, not an increases your skill by 1. 2+. It allows you to blitz multiple units on a roll of 2+. That bypasses the 5+ skill that Soviets suffer under. That changes the game. These commander abilities can change the game, and some of them are actually better than others. Some of them are just cheaper versions of others. You will eventually come up with like house rules or limitations to how these are to be used, because some of these just you don't want to have happen. Like putting armor plating on a mouse is just overkill. You don't want to do that. You want to keep your friends. When it comes to Clash of Steel, I think this game really does have a place. Let me show you this way. People have said, why make a new game that competes with Flames of War, that competes with itself? It doesn't. Here's why. In Flames of War, you have Early War, which covers 39 to 41. You have Mid-War. Technically, it's their favorite setting, but you get the idea. Everybody's favorite setting is Late War, and that covers from 44 and 45. Technically, it ends here, but no one's really caring too much about that. Clash of Steel takes place here and covers all of this space out here. The experimental vehicles and the fact that a lot of the vehicles that were around and considered good in Late War are now garbage here is a serious point of this game. Clash of Steel allows you to take care of the experimental vehicles that never really got into production and treat them as if they got into production. It's its own little setting, too. It's not historical. If air support or infantry ever showed up in this game, things would change. Clash of Steel and Flames of War need to be separate, and I like the fact Clash of Steel is just a tank game because it makes it more casual. Casual games have their place. In-depth games have their place. I'm not ending my career with Flames of War. I'm going to go over the forces, but one thing you got to know, there's something funny I did for my collection. I threw out the cards that I thought were useless units. Just because maybe I should keep them for reference purposes, but then again, that's why I have these books. These books are going to be references for building armies. When it comes to me playing the game the way I want to have, the cards for my forces. I am going to discuss it from the least useful, in my opinion, to the most useful, in my opinion, for each force, starting with the Germans and going from there. I did do some math from this game. I opened up a spreadsheet and started playing with numbers. This is a chart for penetration for this game, and I have listed here the armor value and which tanks they go with. I didn't put the who has which gun, but this active line is the anti-tank rating. The highest anti-tank rating in the game so far is 19, but you can bring it up to 23 with special cards and abilities if you really want to. In this game, the most average armor rating is 10. I've looked at it's pretty much sitting at 10 because there's so many lower and so many higher that the average balances out because there's so many 9s, 10s. There's two 11s. There's the IS-2 and the Churchill, and then the Jumbo. The Jumbo is also 11. This makes a difference. If you get an armor of 10, that means you deflect the most average anti-tank in the game on a roll of a 5. And you tie on a 4. So you got a 50-50 chance of dying whenever you get hit. 14 is your baseline. You have to kind of work off of that. If you want 17 anti-tank, it's around there. Most forces have 17 anti-tank unless you are playing Americans who get bigger guns, or if you're playing Soviets who get smaller guns. They go straight from 15 to 18, and that's what they have. With this arrangement, one thing is very certain. Some tanks will just be better than others. The Super Pershing is pretty good because it's anti-tank rating of 18 and its armor of 13. The King Tiger is pretty good. The Assault Pershing can deflect a lot of rounds too. But there are two tanks that really break this game, and it's the Mouse and the Tortoise. With a side armor of 11 and with a side armor of 13 for the Tortoise and the Mouse, you're not going to be destroyable by certain vehicles. The following vehicles cannot destroy a Tortoise. The Chaffee cannot destroy a Tortoise. Churchills cannot destroy a Tortoise. Cromwells cannot destroy a Tortoise. The basic Puma cannot destroy a Tortoise. They can have some hard luck with that anti-tank 12, but they have to be pretty close to get through that. The Mouse is more difficult. These units cannot harm a mouse. The Hellcat, the Chaffee, the Easy-8, the Jumbo, the Churchill, the Cromwell, the T-34-85, the T-44, and any version of the Puma or derivatives. All of those vehicles cannot pierce a mouse. So if your force is made up of primarily those and someone brings a mouse, you're just done for. It's all about maneuver at that point, and you're probably going to slowly dwindle down. The good news is there are ways to get through it. Most vehicles have a difficult time punching the side of that mouse, though. The Pershing, the Jackson, the Centurion 1, the Archer, the Comet, the Challenger, the IS-3, the IS-2, the IS-122, the T-54, the Panther, the Tiger, and the Panzer 470 are all going to have very difficult times beating the mouse from the side. There's a shorter list of units that have a difficult time beating the Tortoise. That's because the Tortoise's armor rating on the side of 11 is actually far more rational than it sounds. The Mouse, on the other side, has supremacy of armor, and that side armor is just so high. There's very few units that treat it easily. Now, let's go through the list of units that can easily kill a mouse from the side. No one can kill it from the front yet. The T-95 can, the IS-130 can, the T-29 can, and the T-30 can. 3 out of 4 of those are American. 1 of them is Soviet. There's an entire slew of vehicles that have an easy time killing the Tortoise. That's because once you get past anti-tank 15, it kind of pops things that are anti-tank 11 or lower. With that in mind, you're going to have to gauge your list and take at least something with high anti-tank. So if someone brings one of those super tanks, you have a chance of getting through it. Then again, high anti-tank is also pretty good. So you kind of want to balance out your options to see where you go with the resources you have available. High anti-tank is going to be necessary for taking on just the side armor of things like Mouse or the Tortoise. When it comes to facing off against those and fielding them in multiple numbers, you're going to have to think about it. Otherwise, with that range, they will eventually shoot you down though. So you have to be very careful with how you handle range and super heavy tanks in this game. Here's another consideration we have for wargaming. Numbers win in a war game. So here is a real question. Who's got the lunch meat? Who can do the best spam? I'm going to be honest with you. The answer is the Russians, but I'm going to prove it to you instead of just saying so. So let me walk you through. I've gone and looked for the cheapest tank at the highest volume you can bring them at. So we got the Germans. The Germans' cheapest tank is the Tiger. 13 points for 4 tanks. That's about 3.25 each. You take that times 6, you get 78 points worth of tanks. And you get 24 tanks out of it that are actually pretty good. The British are not actually a good spam force because that cap of 3 tanks, that standard of theirs, limits what they can do to just cover the field in tanks. However, they have an alternative. They don't exactly spam, but if you were to spam with the British, here's how you do it well. You have the Centurion 1. 10 points for 3. You get 3 tanks, of course, and they are 3.33 points each. So that's pretty good. You'll be spending only 60 points on these. Thank God, right? And you'll only get 18 tanks. So you're probably going to be bringing a Tortoise for your headquarters. You'll be bringing support options that'll balance out the weaknesses of your Centurion 1. It doesn't have much, by the way, as far as weaknesses goes. Now, you could probably spend up and bring a Centurion 3, but you probably won't be bringing 6 platoons of them, because that's kind of the standards. If you can bring 6 platoons, you bring 6 platoons, right? You get 6 here, you get 6 here. You wouldn't bring 6 platoons. You'd probably just bring 5. We have the United States. Their cheapest tank is easily the Easy 8. And for 10 points, you get 5 tanks. Multiply that by 6, and you get 30 tanks. So far, they're doing pretty good for spam. In fact, I'd say they're second best. However, the Soviets, T-44, for 22 points, you get 10 tanks. That's for 2.2 points each. And if you just multiply it out 6, all told, you get 132 points worth spent. And you'll have 60 tanks on the field. That's crazy. What's realistic, though, for, like, let's say a standard 100-point game, assuming 100 points becomes the standard? Times 4 platoons, which has a full 10. That'll bring you up to 88 points, and you get 40 tanks. Let's say you want to edge it a bit more. There is a little fluke in the point value system, though. You bring 6 of 7 instead. You're spending 90 points, and you get 42 tanks. Because of that fluke, they're actually 2.14 points apiece at 7. Realistically, with a T-44, you could literally swarm the table and have plenty left over for your headquarters and special abilities as far as cost. The Russians and the Americans are the best spammers, and they get good tanks out of it. The Easy 8 has higher anti-tank, and the T-44 is just amazing with its armor value. The British really have this thing where they can't spam. Usually, if you want to bring lots of tanks, you're trying to edge your most expensive tank into that option that allow you to actually get efficiency out of your force. The Tigers are pretty nice, though. They can beat the British just because they can bring 4 tanks instead of 3. And as a result, they can spend more points, have more tanks on the table. When it comes to spam, you can do it in each army except for the British. The only downer, I would say, the British are capped at 3. I'm sorry, that makes them kind of suck. My honest choice would be to go with the United States with Easy 8s. However, Soviet players will want to do Soviet. So honestly speaking, the T-44 is an amazing flank and spanker tank. You'll probably want to go the T-44 instead. Now you could spam other tanks. A lot of the SU tanks cap at 5. You have a point value problem with the T-54. It's too expensive to spam effectively. Although, it can spam effectively. So if you're willing to spend more money but have less tanks on the table, you'll be getting in good numbers. Just not enough to like meet the T-44 and its amazingness. If you're talking about spamming out a list, this is the math you'll want to know. The Germans have some of the most eclectic and best vehicles in this game. Their support options, they get 3 of them. Technically 4, but one of them is in question because of possible typos. I threw out the card for the Panzer 470 because the Panzer 470 is a good tank, but it's a support option. It's cheaper than the Tiger, so if you really want to save points, you can. It won't count for morale, but you might as well buy the Tiger and just use that. Anyway, my idea of a support option is the Hornice. The Hornice has like no armor, really, but it's got a pretty good gun. And if you want a support option that's just gun, it has decent statistics and speed, so you can move around with it a little bit and set up an ambush. This is a great ambush choice. You deploy in terrain already, so don't worry too much about your cross value and just hammer away with all of your dice. It's cheaper than a lot of things that have anti-tank 17, so it is a good choice for that. However, it's not the best support choice that the Germans have. The Puma does not come as a single card. You get 2 of them. Whenever you get a Puma unit, you get 2 of these guys and 1 of these guys, unless you pay 3 points instead of 2, in which case you get 2 of these guys. Puma is a good choice because it is extremely cheap in a list that has very few cheap tanks. It's a support option, but then again, you're probably going to see the Puma die after performing some kind of interesting scout ahead deed. They've got stormtroopers, they've got spearhead, they've got scout, they have almost no armor. Their guns are only decent enough to fight like tank destroyers and other scout vehicles, but to be perfectly honest, that 12 can do some flanking and spanking pretty efficiently, so you'll kill a few Centurions, you'll kill some Soviet tanks with this one. Don't know about the Puma, but in my opinion, it's actually the best scout just because it's so cheap, and because it's not just spamming the Puma, you get to mix it up a little bit, and they're both scouts. It's not like if this guy dies, this guy can't scout anymore. No, they have the universal rule. So I like that. Good scout. This is an obsolete tank. It was designed in 1942 and it's 1948 in this game. However, if you want a basic bare bones tank as a German, this is your boy. Very basic armor. Very basic anti-tank. No downfall special abilities. It has protected ammo. It's got good range. It's got good, average anti-tank and firepower. This thing will do workhorse work for you as a German. They are your cheap option. Their point value is similar to like a Panzer III or a Panzer IV in late war Flames of War. Think about that. Here's your other bog standard tank, the Panther. It's got more armor. The gun is about the same. It's got better speed. Cross value is the same. It's got infrared, so it's better at night. The thing about the Panther is that it is your bog standard tank in this game. It has more armor. It has less side armor. If you want to do a shooting war, which is what this game pretty much is, you kind of want a Panther. And so these are actually, in my opinion, the best bog standard tank to have. They're not obsolescent. This version came out in 45, and it's doing its job rather well. However, there's other things you may want besides just an average tank. If you like anti-tank, now this is supposed to be a core unit according to its card. According to the book, and just the front part of the book, on its actual stat page, it says core unit. This is supposed to be a support option on the front of the book, but not in its card or in its page. So this thing is questionable what role it has. If it's a support option, it's a decent support option, but it's a downfall because it's a support option. If it's a core unit, I would do a company based on Yeg Panthers. That would be great. That'd be sweet. This has high anti-tank, but the armor drops a little. Everything else is pretty much what you expect on a Panther. However, what do you want the best of both worlds? We have that. The Germans get the Panther 88. The Panther F, I think it's called, or the Panther 2, one or the other. Speed's still great. Armor's still great. Anti-tank is the same gun they have on the Jagdpanther is now available for standard Panthers, and it keeps infrared. There's no losing with this tank. It is more expensive. This is not your bog standard tank. If you want like a really good gun tank, this is your boy. It doesn't quite obsolete the rest of them, because if you want to handle or have more cheap tanks or save some points, handle some chaff vehicles, there's other tanks you can buy besides this one. But this is a good fighting tank. It's pretty equivalent to the British Centurion. I think the Centurion's a better tank, but this is a good boy right here. He's what the Germans get, and he's a quality. Now, the Jagdtiger wins on a lot of regards. It's got great armor, some of the highest armor in the game. It's got great anti-tank. There's only one series of gun that hits harder than this. Great firepower, terrific range. Speed's okay. The tactical speed's pretty slow. It's got a lot of weaknesses. It's slow firing. It's an assault gun. But if you want a powerful vehicle, the Jagdtiger is actually a pretty good choice. This is the Maus. It is the super tank that the Germans get. In my opinion, it's not the best vehicle they get, but you know what? It is still pretty good. That armor is stupidly insane. The range is amazing. The anti-tank is amazing. It's still got high skill. It's got high cross value. It's slower than a brick. It's slow firing, but still. It's extremely expensive. It's 13 points per tank, and it will clog up your list really fast. If you want to just spam Maus, you could, but I don't recommend it. The Germans have variety going for them. If you just spam one tank, it's kind of insane. It's the super tank the Germans get. It's not my selection for the best tank the Germans get, though. Best tank the Germans get, we already have. The King Tiger. Tiger 2. Great armor. Not the best, but that will survive a lot of things. Since the highest anti-tank in the game right now is 19, that will survive a lot of things. It's got amazing range. It's got great anti-tank. It's functionally a good tank. These speeds are nice. That skill 3 is nice. It's expensive, but if you wanted to have a glorious charger in your force that could just handle all comers, this is your boy. Tiger 2s are just plain good in this game. And in my opinion, they are the best frontline tank because they balance a lot of things really well. There's another nation that gets a really good frontline tank that I'll be using, but the Tiger 2 is not to be messed with. Good boy. It's a very good boy. That's the Germans. They don't have cheap tanks. Their tanks tend to be a little more expensive, so you'll kind of want like a Panther or Tiger or something like that running around with your King Tigers or with your Mauses. They run out of points fast, and because of that, it's really nice to have those cheap Pumas. The Hornices are nice, but they are a support unit. They don't count for your morale. Then again, you've got Mauses, which will probably stick around forever and a day. If people don't build to take on your Maus, and you decide to bring more than 2 of them, yeah. In all the test games I've played, the list that brought nothing but Maus tended to survive really well, although they were really bad at grabbing objectives for reasons I don't have to explain. Germans, they are the variety and apex force of this game. The British are actually the force I'm probably I'd play them as a secondary, but I like them. I have them almost ready to go. I threw out the Churchill with Abandon, and I threw out the Archer just because I just don't want to use the Archer. The Churchill is probably the worst tank in the game because it's got such a low anti-tank rating. Its only thing it's useful for is the fact it has an armor rating of 11. It's a bait tank. But then again, you might as well ignore them. They're only good for hunting recon vehicles, or they can't even kill itself. And they're not fast enough to flank and spank. So I got rid of that. The Archer is a support vehicle, so it has that problem going with it. The Comet is a core vehicle, and I like the Comet. It's fast. It's got a good gun on it. It's got decent armor. Not amazing armor, but decent armor. It is, though, compared to everything else in this game, technically a bad tank. But you can still make it work because the anti-tank 14, everything but a Maus, you can hunt and kill. So this is actually a good tank if you want to go flank and spank as your primary game. They're cheap. You can bring 3 of them per unit. That's the thing about the British. We're stuck with bringing 3 per unit. It's only ever 3. Some of them get 2, But why would you bring 2 of anything but a tortoise? So here's your comment. The Cromwell is a support option. It's the fastest vehicle in the game, with the exception of the Hellcat. The Cromwell, by comparison, has crappy anti-tank. It's got bad armor. Its cross rating is okay, but what makes it good is it's fast. It is very fast. It's got spearhead, so it deploys additional inches out, and then it can move tactical 12. So your deployment, let's say it's only 4 inches. Who cares? If it's 8 inches, you're doing great. 4 plus 12. 16-inch is enough to go out and grab most objectives. So the Cromwell is a good tank because you can start scoring points at the beginning of the game. Good boy. Very good boy. It's also a support vehicle, but you're probably going to lose it. They're going to die quickly because they're going to be the first to grab an objective and the first to die. If you want more punch, and you also like fast vehicles, but you're not like Cromwell levels of fast, the Challenger is just as fine. It doesn't have spearhead, so you're going to have to rely upon that tactical movement, or you dash in and then fight. Just hope you survive until next turn. With only 3 vehicles in the unit, it's going to be a hardest pressed choice, though. It's fast. It's got a good gun. It's got decent firepower. But other than that, the Challenger isn't doing much for you. At least it's a core vehicle. It's a nice flavor for vehicle, though. I have nothing against the Challenger. It's just, it's not optimized. The British have a single optimized tank, though. The Centurion. You have 2 options. The good Centurion 1 and the amazing Centurion 3. The Centurion 1 is essentially better than a standard Panther and fights pretty well. It's got protected ammo. It's technically, you can bring more Panthers than you can bring Centurion 1s, but that's just because the British get hobbled by having units of only 3. Centurion 3 will make you coffee, though. Anti-tank of 17, stabilizer, so it shoots twice on the move, and it's got the same good movement ratings that a Centurion tank has. The Centurion 3 is, in my opinion, it's the tank I use. My British list is based on the Centurion 3, but the Centurion is my boy. I like it. It's a very good tank. I don't think it's the best British tank, but that's just because the British super tank actually is very well designed. We're going to see that in half a second. You do have a cheaper option, and I like that. It's like the Panther. This is just like the Panther for the British. You've got your cheap version. You've got your good version. Except for this one's better because it's got stabilizers, so you can flank and spank with a Plome. That's just an amazingly good vehicle to run out there and just start hammering stuff with. The Tortoise is the apex British vehicle because it's not slow firing, because it has protected ammo. Its only weakness is being an assault gun, but you know what? We can get around that. If we played Flames of War long enough, you get around that. The highest front armor in the game, bar nothing. Its side armor is doable. Most good units can try to punch it. Panthers can try to kill it relatively easily. Most vehicles out there with really good anti-tank, if they get to the side of a Tortoise, will make the Tortoise go away. It's very slow. But then again, that's not what you want to do with it. This is not the guy you rush out objectives with. If you're taking Tortoises, all Tortoises is a bad idea. You've got Comets, you've got Challengers, you've got Cromwells, you've got Centurions. This thing is your gun platform. You sit in the back with 40-inch range and you just take care of the problems that present itself. Your firepower is average, your anti-tank is really good. So without slow firing, this thing actually makes a lot of sense. I think the Tortoise is actually better than the Mouse because it's missing slow firing. You can actually do some maneuver warfare with this vehicle. The front armor also, there are some things in this game that can bring your anti-tank up to 22 max. I mean, if you want to play a really hardball game, that's a good way to play it. So there's the British. In my opinion, the British are a flavor force, and the fact that they're crimped by the fact that all of their units pretty much have to bring 3 in a platoon as opposed to more up and down. Things like the Tortoise can bring 2. The Tortoise is the only vehicle I'd bring 2 of. I would never bring just 2 of a Centurion. You need to have that grip on your morale, because if there's only 1 tank left, you test for last stand. The Tortoise is not going to be testing for last stand too often. It's an Armor 21 vehicle. Then we have America, my force of choice in this game, because they actually get all their good stuff. With the exception of one tank, which we still have the model for. It's in the other kit. They have so many multi-kits in this one, it's not funny. America. Oh, I threw out the Wildcat. I'm giving it away for free to a friend of mine because the Wildcat is a great vehicle in Flames of War. And it's got good anti-tank, but it's a support option. It's amazingly fast. But, it's... The Jackson has one higher of anti-tank and can benefit from tactical cards that raise that. Easier because it's just 1 point higher. It'll stick around longer in fights with recon vehicles. But other than that, it's on the bottom of the tier. It's a support option. No armor. It's still got average anti-tank with a 14. But yeah, this thing it's the very bottom of the American tier. Chafee Scout Vehicle. You can bring up to 5 of them. Therefore, it's probably the best scout in the game because you can actually fight other scout vehicles with this scout vehicle and overwhelm them with numbers. Armor is not great, but it'll work against like Puma guns. You can actually pretend to fight a Churchill. You'll never punch it though. You've got great speed. Your anti-tank is miserable. Your firepower is miserable. It's only really good for hunting other scout vehicles, but it's got Spearhead, and that matters. You can bring 3 to 5 of them. I recommend bringing just 3 because its only purpose is to go out and scout and get that Spearhead in. If you really have an opponent that likes to bring light vehicles, you might want to bring 5 though. So keep that in mind. I hate saying this because the Easy 8 is my favorite Sherman, but it's on the bottom of the tier as far as Americans are concerned. There is one good thing about the Sherman, Easy 8. Jumbos are part of its unit. They're not a separate unit. So you can actually take up to 3 Jumbos instead of Easy 8s at a cost of 1 point each. These buggers here can be brought as a unit in Clash of Steel, and that makes them good. The Easy 8 has stabilizers, but so does the Jumbo. The armor gets better. The gun's the same. The vehicle slows down a little. It's tactical still 10, thankfully. You lose a few inches here and there, and your cross value goes to hell. So this is more of a great out in the open. It's inferior to things like a Panther or a Centurion 1, but it's a great bait tank, and they're relatively cheap. The Easy 8 does have a place. If you want to play a game with an Easy 8 or Jumbo, you can. They're a relatively effective spam tank. Pershings. These Pershings are on their own little dealio. See, cost more, basic tank. This is pretty much the American Panther with 9 front armor, 14 anti-tank. It's an American Panther, essentially. With the exception of the cross rating, their movement ratings don't really change that much. The Super Pershing has better front armor. And it's got better anti-tank. You'd say, hey, it's a great vehicle, right? I should just pay for this. It costs more, so you pay the price for this. And that cross value 5 means if you ambush with it, you're never getting out of that ambush position if you show up in terrain. If you ambush out in the open, you're just crazy. You have amazing range, amazing anti-tank, slow firing. So you got your downfall with this one. Pershing's still pretty good, though. I might actually get another box of Pershings so I can actually play Super Pershings instead of standard Pershings. I like the standard Pershing, even though I'm going to say that the other Pershing is better. But that's because I like the cross value and I like the speed ratings on this tank. The Assault Pershing. It's got 16 front armor. And it still has the same gun. And it has no real other weaknesses. It's slower. The cross value was retained, even though it gained an insane amount of armor. I recommend it as a command vehicle because you can bring it as a command option. It's only 5 points. Very basic command vehicle, but it'll survive a lot of things that he won't. It's not as good as a King Tiger, but it can pretend to be a King Tiger, and that's good enough for a lot of people. Now we're going to get into stuff that the Americans have that's really interesting, because the Americans don't lose in this game. 14 front armor. 19 anti-tank. The Americans get the anti-tank scores in this game. You want to beat someone to death with your anti-tank cannons? This is the way to go about it. Their tanks are kind of designed to go to a location and park. You're penalized by slow firing, but with the rate of fire 2, you can just park in a location and just dump rounds in an area until your problem goes away. 14 front armor does not sound amazing, but it's good enough to withstand most things in this game until special shenanigans happen. 14 A 14 front armor can survive a hit from a 19 anti-tank gun. So if you're doing mirror matches, you have to worry about that. If everything else, which has a max anti-tank of 18, is fighting with you, you're not too worried because you have a decent fair chance against the biggest guns in the game with this thing. Also, did I mention you have amazing range? Yeah, 48 inches. You'll reach across the table easily. Then there's this, which if you liked that gun but you wanted more armor, you can. This is the super tank the Americans get. It's not my favorite tank, and it's not the best tank they get, but it's a pretty good tank. 17 front armor. It's pretty much the American mouse. It's got better anti-tank than the mouse does. It's not faster than the mouse. It should be slower. This thing should have a tactical 6, terrain dash 8, cross country 8, road dash 8. Really, it should. It was a slow tank. But I'm okay with these stats. I'll just live with it. T-28's a great tank. It's a great command tank, too. I have the option in my force to bring it as a commander. Because you know what? It's got all that armor. Might as well survive a few gunfights, right? The T-30. It has the highest anti-tank rating in the game. And auto firepower. If that doesn't make you concerned, let me just tell you it this way. Its anti-tank rating is big enough to punch everything but the mouse and the tortoise. And it does not roll for firepower. It just kills whatever it penetrates. Or auto bails it. If it ties, you don't roll. It just automatically bail. It's got decent movement stats too. Decent cross value. Armor is great. It's in that lovely 14 range where you're not paying for heavy armor, but you're still got great armor on. The T-30 is probably the ugliest tank in the game. If it gets into the side of a mouse, the mouse only can save itself on a roll of 6. That's one set chance of 6 of surviving an attack by a T-30. Thank God it's slow firing. Otherwise the mouse would be scared. This is an amazing tank. You can do all kinds of terrible things with this tank, and there's no way people can stop you. It's cheap enough that you can bring multiples of them too. The American force is not going to be getting any more new toys anytime soon unless they make the American T-34 for it. With the T-95/T-98, with the T-30 and T-29, the America has their good tanks already. The America starts out the game strong. They're in a good position. The only thing I might say is that our scouts are a little weak, but who cares too much? The Americans are the firepower force in this game. I'm going to pay special attention to the Soviets because the Soviets have a special ability nobody else has. Their most expensive tank is 3.5 points. We have mouses that cost 13 points, tortoises that cost 11. Let me repeat this. Their most expensive tank is 3.5 points. Now, that's going to change in the future if they add more stuff, and I know they've released a new tank in plastic for a different game that's going to be coming to Clash of Steel for sure, but more on that later. We're talking about the Soviets as they are right now. If you're not playing the Soviets like a horde force, you're already failing. If you think the Soviets are golden boys that just rise above all, you should crawl out of the mud or crawl through the mud and bring every last person with a rifle you can to swarm the enemy and lay your bodies on top of them to suffocate them to death. That is the play style of Soviets, and if you don't like it... I threw away the SU-100, and I threw away the ISU-152, because the ISU-152 has a lower anti-tank rating, and it's got auto firepower, which is great, but that means it's pretty fearsome as far as fighting scout vehicles and light vehicles are concerned. It's a really great flank and spanker, but it's got one rate of fire. It's slow firing. It's an assault gun. It's not great. ISU-122, by comparison, has one more anti-tank. It's got a really good firepower. It's got the same average armor. It's got the same average speed, same average cross rating. But it's cheap and effective. Anti-tank rating of 14 makes a difference when you're fighting things that have a front armor of 10, which are very common in this game. So I like the ISU-122 because it's actually a more effective fighter due to its higher anti-tank. If you don't have an anti-tank rating of 14 or higher, you're probably going to struggle a little bit in certain battles. And the ISU-122 is your cheap tank option. It's pretty much, if you want to think of it this way, it's pretty much the Soviet Tiger at this point. I actually like the IS-2 tank. It's the Mark 45 version, the 1945 version. So it's got the higher front armor. It's better than a Churchill because it's got an anti-tank you can actually use. It's got great firepower. Its speed is great. Its cross value is okay. It's slow firing. That's because it's an IS-2. They're designed like ass. The Soviets don't have a lot of really fast, zippy guys, but the IS-2 is a very cheap way to bring effective armor on the field. And so if you've got a bunch of IS-2s from previous Flames of War sets, you can play with this guy and he does just fine. But he's not the best thing the Soviets have. Now the Soviets actually get a pretty good scout. With a cross value of 2+, I could argue it's one of the best scouts in the game. You can bring up to 4 of them. So that's pretty good too. It's got decent armor. It's got great speed. It's got decent anti-tank. Decent firepower. This thing will fight other tank destroyers, and it will fight other scout vehicles to the death and potentially win. It's got higher skill. It's a spearhead unit. It's a good choice of a scout, but it's a support option. Good thing they're designed to go out front and die first. However, because of its high speed and tactical 12, you can do the same thing that the Cromwell can, jumping out ahead to get that objective first turn. So I like the T-34-85. Always have, but right now it's been changed to the role of a recon vehicle. I might get a few. I actually really like this tank, but I can't say it's their best tank. If you want to play the flank and spank game, these guys are actually pretty good though. T-44 has got great speed. It's got tactical 12. Yes, that's actually good. It does not have slow firing. It suffers from being pissant. Really poor anti-tank because it's packing an 85 as opposed to anything higher than that. This is your ultimate flank machine because they're fast. They're relatively cheap. They can run out there. They can survive a lot of stuff with that front armor of 10. They can get into protracted fights with enemy Panthers, Centurion 1s, Easy 8s. It's a great replacement for the T-34-85. Also, it has a different turret. It looks the same, but it's not. There's differences in the minutia. But it's also a double kit. You can build the experimental T-54 and have it just swap out turrets. So it's a really good choice of a tank to have kicking around. I like the T-44, but because of its anti-tank rating of 12, you'll have to use tactical cards to support this thing. Potentially the best tank that the Russians have. If you wanted to spam these guys, it's not a bad idea. It's got front armor 12, which is good, but it's not amazing. It's not sucky. It's not average, but it's good. It's good. They've got tactical 10, which is the worst thing about it. They got slow firing, which is pretty bad too. But they can cross-country dash at 20. Range of 32, that's pretty good. If only they had no slow firing, but that was a problem with this tank. Anti-tank rating of 15 is actually very good. Firepower 2+ is pretty good. You're doing a bit better than a Panther is. You're at the same level as a Centurion 1, but you out-armor them. So in a Centurion 1 duel, you will win because you will easily deflect their shots compared to them. This is not really a super tank. The Soviets don't really get one. If they do, they split between two different vehicles. This is the IS-3. And this is the ISU-130. Together, they make the best tank in the Soviet force. That's because we don't have the IS-7 yet. When the IS-7 shows up, things will change. But as of right now, we've got this to work with. You have to work as a team. This is your frontliner. These guys do like the quarterback. These guys go for the long Hail Mary. That's what they're for. They have shit stats. They have slow firing. They're an assault gun. They have rate of fire 1. You're not going to be pulling off great heroics with them. They only cost 3 points. They're pretty cheap. This is the most expensive tank that the Russians get. 14 front armor. It can handle most of the shots in the game. You can actually get into duels with mouse with the IS-3. Just don't expect to kill it. That's what this is for. With an anti-tank rating of 14, you are gimped. You are severely gimped. If the IS-3 had any... The best thing to put on an IS-3 is your custom ammo cards that increase its anti-tank or cards that increases armor, because you may want to bait harder and deflect harder. If this is your Dwarven Defender, this is your Troll Slayer. The ISU 130 is just an ISU tank. It's got average speed, it's got average armor, but it's the only thing in the Soviet list right now that has an anti-tank rating of 18. Good news, this gun line, get familiar with this gun line stats, because this is what the IS-7 is going to carry. So you will still be suffering from slow firing. Still be suffering from rate of fire 1, but at least you'll be on the best tank ever as far as mobility and armor. It'll probably be closer to like a King Tiger, but it'll have like Centurion style movement stats. That'll be scary. It'll probably be very expensive. I would not be surprised if the IS-7 cost more than a mouse, because the mouse is slow and the IS-7 isn't. This is how you play Soviets. You have to tag team. You can't think of it as individual units fighting individual tanks. You must have your entire army working as a cohesive unit. The IS-3 does one role, the ISU 130 does another. That's how you win with Soviets. My opinion on the Soviets is that they're playable. I don't like the fact that we don't get a mega tank yet, with the IS-3 being our excuse for it. It's really more like a... What does it compare to? It's its own tank. There's no other tank quite like it. It has the same kind of armor that the American tanks have, but its anti-tank rating is like Panther level, so it's not that great. So that's my look into Clash of Steel, and that's my deep dive on thinking what this game is going to be like in its first incarnation. We will see changes in the future. They have strongly hinted they're going to be releasing the E-Series German tanks, and the Soviets will one day get the IS-7, which will completely change the Soviets' game, essentially giving them a fast King Tiger. Thank you for watching this video, and hopefully you have a great time playing Clash of Steel.